Okay, the first thing we did is we took a piece of paper and we folded it in half, and then we folded it over so there was about a ½ an inch or 3/4 of an inch over here. So it's kind of like a book at this point. We stapled 1, 2, 3 staples right on the fold, or pretty close to the fold. And then we turned it sideways and we wrote solving quadratics. Is everybody caught up with me? Solving quadratics. Okay? Now I need you to take your scissors. Okay? Now this isn't going to be as easy as some of the other foldables we made, because what we need to do is we need to make 4 cuts. So we can't start in the middle. Right? We need to make 4 cuts, because how many tabs am I going to have if I make 4 cuts?
4?
5, right? 5. I'm going to have 5 tabs. Because why? How many ways do we know to solve quadratics? 5. Okay? So you kind of eyeball it, and you want to make a cut that goes all the way to the fold. And make a cut that goes all the way to the fold. And you're hoping when you do this, then you can cut in the middle of this section and in the middle of the top section. And hopefully they're close to the same size of tabs. Does that make sense? So see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tabs, and they're all pretty close to the same size, yes? Everybody good? Now guys, please keep in mind that you are only cutting the top. You're not cutting all the way through both pages. Only cutting the top, yes? Excellent, that's excellent. Good job. Good job. Okay, so now go and turn it back this way. I'm going to zoom in on this top section. Okay? The first way we learned how to solve quadratics was by graphing. Okay? By graphing. How do you spell it?
G-H-R.
G-H-R. Okay, well, yeah, don't do that. Just leave out the H. Put it later, right? But not at the beginning. Okay? Let's open the graphing tab. There's going to be 3 things that we think about when we graph. Okay? How are we going to know to solve a quadratic by graphing? Well, the first way is when it says to solve it with graphing. If it says solve with graphing, you should solve with graphing. Okay? What's another way you might know that you should solve it with graphing? When there is a graph. Now sometimes I'll put a graph on there to let you choose if you want to graph or not. And if there's a graph there, you know it's probably one that's okay to graph, right? But if there's a graph, that's a good indicator that maybe you should solve it with graphing, okay? And the last way is when the equation is y equals. Because most quadratics equal what? Try one more time. Still not the same answer when I say try one more time. 0, right? Mostly we want quadratics to equal 0. So when they equal y, that's a really strong indicator that you solve with graphing. Does everybody understand that? Okay. Any questions about solving with graphing? No? Okay. The next way we learned how to solve quadratics was square roots. Good. Square roots. Two things we're going to think about when we're trying to decide if we should solve it with square roots. What's the first thing? When it says to solve with square roots, we should solve it with square roots. Right?
Is that going to be on all of them?
Mm-hmm. What's another way we should know that we should solve with square roots? No, because that's a good guess though, but remember we're the one that put the square root sign in the problem, right? We're the one that does that. How do we know it's okay to put a square root sign in the problem? What does it equal? X squared, right? But not only does it equal x squared, is there an x term in the problem? No. Okay? So when there is no x, or another way to think about it, what's the b value in this problem? Yep, when b equals 0. Okay, when b equals 0 is when there's no x, and that should be another time that you know to solve with square roots. Everybody understand? Any questions about solving with square roots? Okay, what's the next way we learned to solve quadratics? Yep. Factoring. When it says we should solve it by factoring, we should solve it by factoring. Good. And the other time we should solve by factoring is when the quadratic can be factored. It doesn't do any good to try to solve it by factoring if it's a quadratic that can't be factored, right? Look at AC. Multiply AC, find B. Two things that multiply to be AC and add to be B. If you can't think of something right away, don't solve it by factoring. Okay? Because maybe it's able to be factored, but if it's not easy, there's probably an easier way. Okay? Everybody okay with factoring? Okay, what was the next way? Completing the square. Okay, completing the square is next. 1, 2, 3, 4. What's the first one? When it says. Think back to completing the square. What made things easy when we were completing the square? When A was what? If A is 0, it's not a quadratic. If it's 1, right? When A is 1, we didn't have to do a whole bunch of mess, right? We just started by dividing B by what? 2, and doing what to it? Squaring it, right? We divided B by 2 and squared it, right? Which brings us to the next thing. We want B to be what? If we're having to divide it by 2, we want B to be what? We want B to be even. Because if it's odd, that's going to be a fraction, and that's going to be a mess, isn't it? Okay? We also really want B and C to be smaller. When they're bigger numbers, that can cause messes. Not that we can't do it, but if we're trying to find the best way, if we're looking at all these notes that we're taking today, this foldable, and we're trying to find the best way to solve a quadratic, B and C need to be smaller if we're going to complete the square. If B and C are bigger, there's other ways that are probably easier. Okay? Does that make sense? Which way would be easier? Well, it depends. Right? Depends on if it's factorable. Factoring is probably going to be easier. If it's not factorable, then what? What's the last way we know? Quadratic formula. When are we going to solve with the quadratic formula? When it says or whenever I want to. Gosh. Why? It works every time. It always works. Okay? Any questions about any of these tabs that we have right now? Okay, one more thing that we have to do is what? Turn it over, put your name on the back. Okay, name on the back. And when your name is on the back, what do you get to do? Use it on your test. Okay? Any questions about deciding how to solve a quadratic? You good?